Posted by you/guilty_dance_4440. For context, I am currently a college freshman. I am on a full ride to my university. Every semester, I receive a check sent to my house to cover my housing costs, which is about $9,000. My unemployed father got evicted from my old address because he wasn't paying rent, so my family started living in a hotel. I was wondering how they were paying for the hotel, considering it was $150 a night. Turns out, my father used my college check to cash out and pay for the hotel for 2 months. I begged him to pay off my college housing costs for 2 months straight. He lied to me, telling me that the money was tied to some funds, which were hard to access, very confusing, but keep in mind I have absolutely zero financial literacy and my father never went into detail. I brushed it off, hoping that everything would work out for the best. My college housing gave my father a deadline to pay off the housing costs, November 1st. I was stressed for 2 months, unable to eat well, sleep, socialize, etc. If my dad didn't pay it off, I might have to drop out. When the deadline passed, I called my dad and asked him why he hadn't paid off my housing costs. He finally revealed that he had used the check to pay for the hotel we were living in. I was furious and started interrogating him like a prosecutor. He blamed the family for being responsible for using my college money, not himself, and also blamed me. He had also lent me allowance money for 2 months, telling me it was from my relatives, when in fact it was from my $9,000 housing check. I asked him why he would do this, and he said that he didn't want to stress me out. I cried, telling him I had worked way too hard in high school to drop out. I told him he owed me an apology 3 times over the phone, but he refused because he believed he had done nothing wrong since he was providing for the family. I asked him again, and he said sorry in a mocking voice. I told him he was full of crap, and he started saying that he wanted to put a gun to his head and end himself, and that it would all be on me. This isn't the first time he has said that. I told him to go ahead and do it, and then I hung up. My mom called me, and I informed her about the situation. She told me to apologize to my dad, and I told her that, as psychotic as I may sound, I have no remorse, especially after what he did. My mom threatened to disown me, but I somehow mended things with them for 3 weeks. It is currently Thanksgiving break, and my father still hasn't paid off my housing costs. He said he would get the money on Saturday to pay it off. My mom told me again to apologize to him after he paid my housing costs, and I said I would avoid conflict. But I think I'm way too stubborn to apologize, especially because I genuinely believe I have nothing to be sorry for. My dad never fully apologized and made a joke out of me to the family. Update 2 months 3 weeks later. First and foremost, immediately after this happened, I managed to get a separate debit card without my parents knowing. I don't have a job right now, but I'm looking to get one later on in the semester. I didn't go to the financial aid center because my dad somehow managed to pay me back. I'm assuming it was through my grandmother's Social Security checks. Last December, after weeks of calling my father to make up for my scholarship money and pay me back, he finally sent me a check for $9,000. The check arrived in my dorm mail around midnight. I was asleep by then, and my dad was spam calling my phone to tell me it was in the mail. I didn't call him back until 1 in the afternoon because I had an exam that day. He started cursing at me, telling me how he couldn't sleep all night because I didn't answer my phone. I responded, saying, "The stress you put me through for 3 months by lying about my scholarship check is nothing compared to the stress you went through for a day." He then began insulting me in every way possible, telling me I was spoiled. I swore back, saying, "Are you effing serious?" and he hung up. Moments later, my dad had my mom call me because he didn't want to argue with me. She screamed at me, saying that I should always respect him as a father and that I should apologize for swearing. I acknowledged that, yes, I did swear at him, but he had also sworn at me, calling me a bunch of slurs and other insults. She also accused me of purposely ignoring them, even though I had made it clear several times that I was asleep and had an exam at 9 in the morning, which is why I didn't call them back at midnight. I told her that we shouldn't even be having this conversation because he was clearly in the wrong in this entire situation, and any other kid would have gone to the financial aid center, and my dad would have gotten in trouble. My mom misunderstood me, thinking I was saying that I was going to report my dad. She had a mental breakdown and hung up. Moments later, my dad called and told me to go ahead and report him because I would be the one going to jail instead of him since he had sent me some of the money from the check, which is total BS. I called him out on his lie, and he said he was permanently severing ties with me so I could learn my lesson. Then he hung up. I didn't call them for a week until I realized I didn't have a place to stay for winter break, since my dorm was closing. I swallowed my pride and called them back to apologize. They said they'd accept me back into the family. This honestly still keeps me up at night, but I literally had no choice but to stay with them over the break. Over the break, they noticed that I was much colder and more distant towards them, and they still wonder why. Fortunately, I received the $9,000 check from my university to pay for this semester's housing fees. The best thing that came out of this situation is that I ended up reconnecting with my estranged sister, 25F. Long story short, my father financially abused her for years, maxing out her credit cards and leaving her $20,000 in debt. They cut all ties a year ago after my sister started dating a guy they didn't approve of. When I was on good terms with them, they painted her as the bad guy, telling me she betrayed them by choosing her boyfriend over the entire family. I also didn't know that my dad had financially abused her. It turns out she was in the same situation I was in and ended up dropping out because my dad didn't let her take out a student loan. I talked to my sister, and she said she was honestly glad she severed ties with them because, while she may not be financially stable, she's finally financially independent. We're closer than ever now, and I probably consider her as a shoulder to lean on. Mentally, I'm really not doing well. I'm generally stoic, but this has taken a hard emotional toll on me because my family was my world. Before college, I always knew my father was difficult, but my mother was my ride or die. I told her everything, I helped her through her marital problems, and she confided in me. The fact that she chose my abusive, unemployed father, the man she always talked about wanting to divorce, over her own daughter is heartbreaking. She still expects me to be her armchair therapist, and she told me she wants me to act like I did before. I told her over break that no matter what she does, she will never regain the trust I had for her back then. As for my father, despite his flaws, I never expected him to use my check. He always put such a huge emphasis on education and told me he wanted me to have the life he never had. And knowing that he would sacrifice my education just to stay in a fancy $150 a night hotel is incredibly disheartening. Recently, I've been very isolated, though I still talk to a few people, my grades are slipping, and I haven't been eating or sleeping well. Maybe this situation should be a wake-up call for me, but I've reached a point where I'm completely apathetic about everything. Thankfully, I stay away from any illicit substances, but even so, I feel like my life is on autopilot. Second update 7 months 1 week later. My dad stole my college scholarship money months ago. Now, he's not getting a single penny from me. As you may or may not know, I made 2 posts several months ago about my father using up my college money. I also want to clear up some confusion about those posts. My parents are religiously married through the Catholic Church in another country, but they never got legally married because my dad doesn't want my mother to get a green card. And yes, in some colleges like mine, the broken education system in America still uses checks, though most people opt for direct deposit. I'm glad to say that my father no longer has access to my finances, and I am now in low contact with them. Thanks to the advice of this subreddit, I secured my social security card and other important documents months before I left for college. I also managed to get my first job. I've distanced myself from my parents and taken a lot of time to reflect on them and their actions. They've also distanced themselves from me after I finally put my foot down and refused to provide them with financial assistance. They called me self-absorbed, and once again, my father told me he would end himself if I didn't help him. This time, instead of telling him to go ahead, I simply said that's a decision he would have to make and that I can't be responsible for it. I realize that no matter what I do, they'll never change. They will always be the type of people who financially leech off others by using self-exit threats and weaponizing self-pity, but they're too emotionally stunted to recognize the harm in that. Their psyche is so twisted, and I've spent a lot of time mourning the parents I never truly had. They were never meant to be parents, but they're also just people. Sometimes, people like them exist. As for my mother, she completely turned her back on me and said I was a TV villain for not giving my father the money he supposedly deserved for raising me and my siblings. I told her he was never emotionally present as a father, and neither was she. Not just because of the suicidal threats, but also because they both posed a threat to our well-being. She used to treat me more like a friend and therapist than a daughter. She would use me to vent about the emotional and mental abuse my dad inflicted on her. But at the same time, she was the first to turn her back on me in an instant if it meant protecting my father's feelings and making him happy. Sometimes, she even went as far as to attack me or my siblings if we did anything to upset him. I guess I still feel some pity for her, considering she's an illegal immigrant in an abusive situation, but that doesn't outweigh the damage she caused. It was impossible to communicate with her because she lived in her own little world. I don't think she ever truly loved me or saw me as a person or a child, just as an outlet for her emotional dysfunction. Recently, my mother called me and lied about my dad being ill so they could take a couple of bucks from me again. I told them to find their own source of money and hung up. I check up on my little brothers every now and then. They're currently still living in the hotel. While their physical safety isn't at risk, I still struggle with the guilt of leaving them behind, and I'm unclear about what the future holds for them. This past year, I learned what it means to be independent, not just financially, but also free from their mental control and able to make decisions for myself. Needless to say, I'm happier, I'm surrounded by good and caring people, my grades aren't great but they're better, and I'm finally in a good place right now. In the end, everything's going to be alright. And even if it's not the end.